Hello, everyone, and welcome to Seriously Loco, a seriously crazy fan podcast for El Paso Locomotive FC. I'm your host, Phil Bakke, and I'm joined tonight by my co-host, Mika Burrell. Mika, I know we're kind of recouping from last night still, but how are you doing this Thursday after a midweek game and a midweek loss?
Yeah, I mean, it just feels like there's been so many games that it's kind of hard to like digest everything, because everything that happened last night is worthy of like a 2-hour discussion if we had the time.
No joke.
But it's been 3 games since we've recorded, or 3 games have passed since the last time we spoke. So yeah, a lot has been going on around the club. Not all of it rosy, but we'll have to just address that tonight a bit.
Yeah. There hasn't been anything going on with Liam Rose.
Right, that was not.
If that's not a pun about
No.
Liam Rose.
It's all good in Liam Hood, as far as I know. So.
as far as we're aware. I do apologize to everybody for the kind of lag in recording, because I've been out of town, so I contributed a little bit to the
all good. We all deserve vacation. Did you enjoy yourself?
I did. Yeah, we took a trip to Colorado. We were out in the mountains, like southwest of Denver, and then out to San Diego. And the Loyal were not in town, so as much as I would have liked to line it up that way, just to make my way around USL, there were no. They were out in Hartford.
Got it.
Against that supposedly championship level outfit.
Oh my God, what a
out there in
trip,
Connecticut.
by the way. San Diego to Connecticut. Christ.
Oh, that'd be awful. Yeah. So didn't get a chance to see them. I did see people, like, we were in a neighborhood in North Park in San Diego near where the locals, like their
the SG
supporters group, was having their watch party, and I did see people like milling into the bar where they were having. I was like, oh, I'm spotting a little bit of Loyal gear on this drive back, and it was because we were passing the bar where the watch party was. So
nice. My only question is, did you have a California burrito?
I did.
So good. It's
so
literally
good.
So basic. It's just like carne asada with French fries. I mean, and I say that in like with admiration. Like, it's something so simple but so good.
It's so good. I had tacos, and I will say I was not anticipating this. I did not go into this, and with my wife, who is a New Yorker by birth, I was not anticipating the level of bagel sandwiches that they have hit in San Diego. I don't know if that's like New York expats like out that way who said no to Florida but we went to a place called Nomad Donuts, which I actually have been meaning to talk to you about, because it is like Filipino owned.
Sick.
And they had an ube coconut donut, which was like off the chain.
I love ube. So it was purple, right?
It was.
Love.
And they had the bagel sandwich that I had was the most unique thing that I've probably ever had, which was it was called the Island Boy. It was it was egg and a chicharron crusted ham. Oh
my God.
And then almost like, it wasn't kimchi, but it was kind of like a kimchi, sort of like a slaw, like a spicy slaw.
Yeah.
With furikake on it.
Oh my God, that sounds so good.
It was like Spain and like Japanese food, literally, like combined. And oh man, it changed the way that I think about the world.
Well, that all sounds delightful, honestly.
So we're just gonna swerve Copa Tejas and San Antonio, the San Antonio
podcast.
Let's just talk about what's the best bagel sandwich you ever had.
This is a grand podcast now.
No, but we do. we are an El Paso Locomotive podcast, like I talked about, knocking out some of the admin. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram. We haven't done the Threads thing yet. I'll be honest, Threads, I've been there. It's kind of boring me. I don't know if I really see the appeal yet. So
yeah, we'll
play it by ear.
In it. We'll put a pin in it. We'll revisit in Q3.
We're on we're on Instagram anyways, so Zuck's already got our data. We're good on that front. But yeah, you can find us at Seriously Loco on those platforms, YouTube as well. And you can also find our podcast on any of the major podcast platforms, basically wherever you get podcasts. If you search Seriously Loco Soccer Pod, you could probably get there with Seriously Loco now. And if while you're there, you have a chance to leave us a rating or a review, we'd really appreciate that because it does get more locos seeing the podcast. Despite a tough loss in the Copa Tejas last night, we do have a lot to discuss today, Mika. So we've got, obviously kind of talking about the game more broadly. We'll talk about some of the impacts like to Locomotive's run. We'll talk about this goal scoring drought that we've been on. We'll talk about maybe some of the roster moves, some of the substitutions that we've been seeing. And then we got some interesting news / speculation about stuff going on in USL and potential for promotion relegation ? That's my clickbait for the episode. So anyways, the Seriously Loco match review. Mika, diving into the loss last night, Locomotive losing 2-1 to San Antonio FC at home. Coming off of now, a loss in the Derby del Camino Real, a very disappointing draw, I would say, away at Monterey Bay, and then sandwiched with another loss now last night in San Antonio. I wanted to talk just first about the loss itself and how you were feeling about it, and then maybe address some of the stuff that happened at the end of the match as well.
Yeah, obviously it's been a very barren, disappointing run for El Paso Locomotive since the derby. When you lose to your big rivals at home, that there's layers of hurt to that, right? But it's how you respond, and that's kind of Eric Calvillo, actually the goal scorer for Locomotive against San Antonio the other night. He talks about that in the post-match press conference of we need to respond, and it's they've had a couple opportunities to respond, right? And haven't done that.
You've been needed.
Yeah, and he's not, and it's not because I want to dig out that comment. He's correct, obviously. Mm-hmm. It's just we're waiting, right? So trying to get over that derby loss with another 2 games of drop points is just really tough. And the cracks, if you could call it that, were starting to show in recent games even before that. I think, correct my math, Phil, but I think it's just 6 points we've got from our last 6 games. Something really dire like that? Yeah. 6 points out of a possible 18?
I think so. 3 draws and a win. 3 draws and a win.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. 2 losses. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's tough, and we really have been spoiled for much of the early summer with that 12-game unbeaten streak, and we've sung the praises of Brian Clarhaut and the coaching staff and the players for how they were able to turn around such a disappointing start. But I think now this is actually a really unique kind of test for Brian Clarhaut and his first real test of mid-season adversity, right, at Locomotive. Can he weather the negativity? Can he arrest the complacency, if there is any? Mm-hmm. And find solutions, right? Everyone's looking at him to find solutions. And I think Brian and his staff still have, for me anyway, still have plenty of credit in the bank.
Absolutely.
I'm not I'm not saying like Clarhaut, right? But by no means am I even that close. It's been disappointing. But yeah, I think it's also, there's more than meets the eye though at the same time, because I don't think that we've necessarily been like completely dire. I think we've been wasteful in a lot of the football that we've played over the past couple of weeks. So that's kind of my monologue on the vibe.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think it one shows how quickly things can change in football. Like you can quickly go from 12 game unbeaten run to winless in 3, and like that's not a tough like jump to make mentally for a fan base or for a team. And there's something about this little run that just feels like, we talked so much about the confidence that the team was carrying through that 12-game unbeaten run. And obviously to have the streak snapped, you talked about a response. Oftentimes, like, teams, when they do come to the end of an unbeaten run or a winning run like that, the response is something that a lot of people watch for, because you think like, okay, the good teams, that's just a blip. It's in the past. It's, it's one bad night. But there is something just kind of lingering from losing that match against New Mexico that it feels like it's hanging over a few of the players in particular, particularly in front of goal. Like, that's where it just really is being felt at the moment, because we're just really struggling to score from open play. And there was, I think such a confidence and an emphasis from some of the finishing in this unbeaten run that just isn't really there at the moment. And we'll talk more about the struggles in front of goal. We're going to kind of jump ahead to the end. We'll do a little Tarantino on the dissection of this, but at the end of the match, 2-1, Locomotive are trailing. They're chasing the match. There's a lot of, there were a couple of chances. I wouldn't describe them as like big chances, I guess, but there were a couple of chances to grab the equalizer in the build up towards that final whistle. Few substitutions get made, trying to change the game. And then right as stoppage time is kind of coming to an end, there are these pretty intense scenes, like, despite a game that I think was played largely pretty sportsman-like, even compared to the fixture in San Antonio just a couple of weeks ago, that felt more maybe chippy during the match than this one did. And then any latent like frustration or anger or anything that everyone was feeling really boiled over at the end of the match, and it ended in kind of a sea of bookings. It was hard for everybody to dissect exactly what was going on. We're pretty confident that Lamar Batista from San Antonio was sent off, as was Chapa Herrera, who was obviously a second half substitute. So these scenes, it's one of those things where we start to talk about, and we actually did get a question from our resident San Antonio fan, Harry at Ramen Cole on Twitter. I'm not sure I can handle a playoff match with Locomotive, but has San Antonio and El Paso Locomotive finally developed into a rivalry? It's always been respectful, but this year it feels different. There's something about those scenes at full time which almost, I don't know, like the first game felt like a kind of a rivalry in the sense that a lot was taking place between the lines. And for that much to go on after the whistle, it almost felt like something else, like not really a rivalry, almost just like petty and like nasty for no reason.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. And I think a lot of it has to do with, quite frankly, the officiating. I think it was pretty clear that Locomotive felt that a standard of officiating had been set on the night that really didn't quite make sense and wasn't equal between the two sides, and that by no means excuses what happened at the end, by the way. I think
Right.
It's important to give like context, perhaps. But yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. I think the the reverse fixture was more like derby like. And I think the football was better for it, to be fair. And so I guess you could say it's developed into a bit of a rivalry. I mean, on paper it totally makes sense. We're two big Texas cities, right? And Copa Tejas and what have you. There's history there. And I mean, rumors that even the rivalry goes as far as Brian Clarhaut and Alan Marcina, right? So having dealt with each other in preseason as well. So yeah, it does feel a little bit different, but I just think Wednesday night is not necessarily like what we like want to see, right? I think it was actually disgraceful. And I want to go just briefly over like what the discipline ended up being that we can tell.
Sure.
And shout out to our fellow podcaster Christian, because he covered the game the other night, and it looked like when all was said and done, it was yellow cards for Chapa Herrera, who arguably it kicked off from his challenge. Miles Lyons and Eric Calvillo, and then for San Antonio, a second yellow and a red for Batista, as you said, and then yellow cards for Zouhir, Hernandez, and Oluwaseyi. And then a straight red for a San Antonio assistant coach. So, just a brawl.
Who was, I will say, was carrying on to the extent that the El Paso police who were providing security for the match actually stepped in. Which was...
You don't want to see that. I don't want to see that. I mean, like, if I try to, like, view it in a vacuum, it's, like, objectively, like, entertaining, I guess. But really, like, because I'm emotionally invested in this stuff, like, and I care about the reputation of El Paso Locomotive and of our city, like, I don't like to see those scenes necessarily. So, yeah. I mean, do we want to, like, because I can't really say definitively what happened other than what I saw, which was Chapa Herrera, substitute, comes on, puts in a challenge that I think is needless.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The tackle from behind, balls
player kind of got away from him.
Yeah, he got away from him.
He just kicks him.
The ball's moving towards midfield. It's not a dangerous position. They're on the near touchline. I don't know. I think Locomotive fans, from what we saw, were like, Chapa knows what he did. And then there's others that are like, well, he was getting choked out. Like, at what, there's levels to this kind of thing. And I'm just wondering, like, what you thought about it. And
yeah, I think Chapa's initial challenge, at least for me, wasn't like, it was probably unnecessary, and also knowing that the game is basically coming to an end, like, definitely not worth the response that San Antonio had. For me, at least.
True. That's true.
I think for San Antonio, now this is going to be a lot of this is going to sound really strange, because at the end of the day, like you said, it's a needless challenge. Chapa shouldn't put it in. And like, San Antonio is dumb for responding in the way that they were. Like, objectively speaking, from the game state, like, you have won the game. Anybody getting sent off from that point, or booked even, why? Like, what is possibly going on that you're needing to get involved?
That's true.
And so I think probably it was one of those things of, like, it was just this escalation of whatever brinksmanship, if you will, from like Locomotive was, Chapa makes this challenge. Yeah, it's kind of shitty, and he probably deserved to get like somebody in his face about it. Lamar Bautista like puts him in a headlock, shoves a few other players, does like, he was just like, it was like this weird grandstanding that was going on, and like, to me, it was just all so unnecessary, where I think there's definitely blame to go around on both sides, and more of the blame because they were winning, or because the final whistle had gone and they had won the game. I just don't get like what could have possibly been done or said that would have sent San Antonio off the edge like that, because they just behaved like so strangely for a team that had just won the game. Like, you would have thought that they actually had just lost in the way that they responded to that challenge.
And I would say that probably extends to the conversation afterwards too. I mean, y'all won. Any San Antonio fans that are listening, you did win the game. Like,
you're allowed to be happy about that.
Yeah, I could be fooled by some of the takes that we've seen this morning. But hey, that's neither here nor there. It's a shame. It's a real shame. And
yeah. But I do think, to Harry's point, I do think that there is something there in terms of the rivalry and it developing some genuine animosity, which I think we've seen in the past with New Mexico United, and again, it's something that the health of the rivalry itself is good for the game, like, between us. I definitely don't want to see it escalate in the way that it did last night, because that's not good for anybody. It makes everybody look bad. When you've got those kind of afters, especially when the final whistle has gone. Like, that's crazy.
Well, that was another point of contention, at least from the Locomotive perspective, is Brian Clarhaut thought there was more football to be played. Eric Calvillo thought there was more football to be played. And so,
right.
And with those afters, as you put them, maybe they're right. Maybe there should be more minutes put on the clock, but the referee had decided he'd had enough, I guess.
Yeah, I guess he from his perspective, he blew the final whistle like before all of that kicked off. Is what I assume, because obviously if he hadn't, and then he just waited and then blew the whistle at the end of a very long stoppage of play, that would have obviously been that wouldn't have made any sense. So I will say, like I said, as it develops, good for the rivalry. And like us and Harry have talked about on multiple occasions at USL, please stop putting the El Paso dates against San Antonio on Wednesday nights. Like, there are lots of people from San Antonio who would make that trip. Truly. And that would help the rivalry a lot if people could go to the frickin' game.
Right. There were some San Antonio journalists, to be fair, but yeah, you're absolutely right. The away fans.
Yeah,
it's not really
making a trip making a 7-hour one-way trip on a Wednesday night is not exactly a fan-friendly excursion.
Right. Yeah.
So tough loss. The way it came about was brutal. The scenes at full time, just totally unnecessary. And so talking about the way that it all came about, jumping back to the beginning, the match kicks off. Very familiar lineup from Locomotive, basically what we've seen, more or less from Brian Clarhaut, with a couple of changes recently because of some injury enforced changes. We see Nick Hines deployed on the left from the start again in this one, which is the only like major change from what he would typically play. Early on in this one, it felt a little bit strange and almost backwards, because San Antonio, who famously we talked about during our last episode about the draw, San Antonio don't keep the ball. They really don't like to have the ball. They had loads of it from basically kickoff, and they were sort of camped out in Locomotive's half for a while. Locomotive, it's kind of, I don't know if it's becoming a trend. Maybe is it unfair to say it's becoming a trend that Locomotive, when they get in these like pressure situations, especially against an effective high press, they do get pinned back pretty well, and we've seen them struggle to break the press, I feel like, recently.
I don't think that's unfair to say. I mean, there was one thing that I took from this game that was really quite strange, I think, is that we were like hoofing the ball away a lot, or being forced into bad passes, or trying to put a pass in a lane that wasn't on. And I think that's credit to San Antonio, that they were compressing the space, making it very difficult for us to settle, and especially in those first 15 minutes. And it's funny because like there were chances for us even despite that. For right? Sure. So it just kind of shows like the ball was just bouncing kind of weirdly anyway. But yeah, I mean, San Antonio were really imposing themselves early doors. One wonders if Locomotive, are struggling with a little bit of fatigue from that trip out to California and then coming back and playing on a Wednesday. Not excuses, but just reasons, maybe. So yeah, and then the starting well generally has been tough. I mean, at least we didn't concede first this time, but I mean, we don't start well lately, and I think it's so hard to improve from there, right? Start as you mean to go on, as they say. And against the most intense team by far in San Antonio, they were never going to let us really settle. And they didn't. I mean, that's their game. A lot of big bodies. They make it very frustrating. I do think the referees or the center ref was very lenient with them, to be fair, in some of the physicality. I would agree. But yeah, definitely a struggle to try and put our foot on the ball, and then when we can't do that, we can't really control proceedings like we know Brian Clarhaut wants to do.
Locomotive only complete 220 passes in this one, which I know for USL might actually sound like a lot, but it is exactly half of the amount of passes that they completed in the previous match against Monterey Bay. So if that gives you any sense of the control that Locomotive failed to have in this game, and what we do, because I would say Monterey Bay, for all of the shortcomings of that game, which were primarily just on the finishing front, that was an exercise in Locomotive, having the control that they would prefer over a game and really kind of dominating proceedings. And unfortunately in this one, it felt just a little bit disjointed, felt wild. And San Antonio played a huge part in that, as you said, pressing effectively. And I think, unfortunately, and maybe we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I do think that pressing us high is becoming kind of the, I think word is out of start putting them under pressure, because they do. It feels like I don't want to say panic, because I think that's too harsh of a word, but we do we kind of get away from our game when we get pressed, and where you would think that's kind of where we could shine, because there's got to be space somewhere. But we end up kind of playing the ball down the flanks. Yeah. But we play a 4-4-2, so the wingers aren't up there. We're playing it into space for Lucho or Aron to chase. And they're quick over a few yards, but they're not the fastest guys. They're not going to beat many people in a foot race. And that's not a criticism of the player. They're just not super pacey guys. And so I think we end up spraying the ball out into these pockets of space out on the wings, where we have we're just kind of one-on-one, where we don't have any sort of advantage. And in reality, the way that we've always effectively beat the press is through the triangle on the flank of or maybe even a rectangle, you might call. I guess it would be a rectangle of a center back, the fullback, the winger, and the central midfielder on that side. Right. All linking up with each other to break the press and get into that space down the flank. We've just kind of said, nope, get rid, and Lucho's going to go chase it. And I think we end up just sending Lucho primarily on this given night, on some wild goose chases for the ball, in the hopes that he'll bring it down. And we kind of limit his effectiveness too, because we're sending him out into this space that he doesn't really need to be in. We've joked that as soon as we see Lucho running the channels, that's when we know we're out of ideas. Yeah. And that's the sort of thing that it felt kind of plan A was get it into that space, and Lucho's going to go get on his bike and chase it. And it just wasn't effective in breaking the press.
Wasn't effective in breaking the press. And I almost wonder if we don't press enough ourselves to kind of like counteract it. I mean, I was just having a peek at like the passes per defensive action stats in USL, and we're one of the more like laissez-faire sides in the league, which has not always been the case, right? I mean, I think this team has undergone quite a overhaul since John Hutchinson's days coaching the team, and I think like that can make for decent matchups. I mean, Tampa Bay, for all their success, they're kind of that way too. They're not that concerned about pressing statistically, but we ended up getting a point from that game, and I think everyone thought that was like a good result at the time.
Right.
But San Antonio, it's a different kettle of fish. New Mexico, same thing. Especially when they, it was the reverse fixture for them, and they were coming to kind of right the ship after they had dropped all 3 points at their place. So yeah. It's just, and then I think that gets us onto like the discussion of like the squad in general. Like it's not big enough maybe to like withstand that. And we talked a lot about how often we play and how like the scheduling's just been atrocious for us with these 3 game weeks, and so I wouldn't be surprised if like all of that is creating this like this dip where our starting 11 like are collectively all down a level, and that's enough to lose you games in this league. So
well, and it's interesting, I know like we talked about it in the aftermath of Monterey Bay in our group chat, talking about, it seemed like Brian waited quite a while to make subs, which implied that a lot of the guys on the bench were going to be involved heavily, maybe against San Antonio, or there was going to be some kind of rotation, and he's keeping the guys that are in this game out there because he knows that some of them are going to feature against San Antonio, or not feature against San Antonio.
Right. So we can use up that reserve now. Yeah.
Right. No rotation from Monterey Bay to San Antonio. And obviously those guys are at training. They understand what's going on with the squad. Like, I know that they're monitoring guys' minutes and stuff, but from somebody watching from the outside, to me, there is a little bit of a like, hey, if we're not going to make subs when things aren't clicking in front of goal against Monterey Bay, like until 75 minutes, and those same guys that played 75 minutes or more in Monterey Bay are also going to start against San Antonio, it just suggests that there's maybe not, I don't know, the trust in the rest of the roster beyond maybe 12, 13, 14 guys.
Which, to be fair, I don't blame him. Because I think that the bench players they're not doing it for me. Yeah. Even when we were in a good run of form, like, God bless them, but I think Manic Sinupe's never really put together like consistent like 90-minute performances. Chris Garcia, I think we've said, kind of a role player. Ricardo Zacarias, like, his form can go in and out, and now I think he's unavailable for the time being. I don't know. I didn't catch whether he got an injury or not, but
yeah, there was a mention of a ankle.
Okay. And
which I know is off the back of like a concussion that he had. So It's just been like kind of one into the other.
Right. And then Petr Petrovic, we've talked extensively about, his hip issues and foregoing surgery, it would seem. And so can't rely on him to like run himself into the ground 90 minutes 3 times a week. Right. So, I mean, in that sense, I kind of don't blame Brian, but at the same time, augment the squad. And we've seen Jose Carrillo get signed and still not make the bench. So I can only assume there's like a visa issue or something. But it just seems like the drop off in quality, if I can say that without sounding too cruel, is a lot. And I get why he starts the same 11, but at the same time, it's human nature that the same people who don't feel threatened in their position could maybe become complacent.
Well, as we continue the conversation around the game, we're joined tonight by Christian Canales. Christian, welcome. Glad you could join us. Obviously, you were at the game, so how did you find it? Just your general thoughts before you dive back into talking about the action.
disappointing on all sorts of levels. So it was not good from my perspective yesterday.
Did you stick around for the depression fireworks after the match?
I did not. I mean, I stuck around for all the shenanigans afterward to end, and that was enough extracurricular for me. I don't know how much they showed on the broadcast, but like it was a solid like 10 minutes after the final whistle before the field was clear. So that was enough for me.
Yeah, they showed a good portion of it on the broadcast. Probably not the entire thing. And yeah, it was like a when you're in Instagram stories and you see FitFam's story has like 30 blocks at the top, and you're about to see something good. That was really where we were at. Just like the best Cincy brawl you've ever seen.
That's exactly what it felt like.
Or the worst Cincy brawl you've ever seen. So Christian, by way of starting things back in terms of describing the action, Locomotive, we talk about they struggle to kind of break out early on, and then really the first couple of times they do break out, they look pretty dangerous, and Eric Calvillo at the heart of it, which we haven't seen this side of Eric Calvillo as much this season, kind of breaking into the box, getting to the end line. He plays a very inventive cross that almost results in a goal initially before from a subsequent ball earning the penalty. But seeing the dribbling, the dynamism from Eric, obviously, I almost thought it was a nice change of pace from what we saw. We've seen more, maybe a more conservative Eric, and he kind of grabbed the game by the scruff of the neck in this case and earns Locomotive a penalty.
Yeah, I mean, they gave him the number 6 this year, and he really took that to heart. He became much less of the 8 that he was playing last year, and it's, I mean, he's done well, but it's also kind of a shame because it's hard when you're good at 2 things, I guess, and you can't necessarily do them both at the same time. So it was like you said, it was very refreshing to see that change of pace from him, and to see him rewarded for it.
Mika, I mean, really the only thing to describe both the dribble and the subsequent penalty, just quality. And you talked about his technique last night, but but Eric putting it all on full display.
Yeah, it's an incredible dribble. I love the inventiveness, and the way that he can just like slalom around folks as ostensibly a defensive midfielder or a central midfielder in this system was really impressive. And I mean, there's at least like 2 fouls, I would think, on him. So the fact that there was even a question about it being a penalty was a little bit laughable to me. I think it's a penalty all day, every day. And he, I mean, when I talk about the technique, I talk about the ball striking technique of Eric Calvillo. I think he's probably the best in the squad, to be honest. And he absolutely rifles it past Jordan Farr, who I think guessed the wrong way anyway. But Eric's confident enough in his penalty routine, though, that he described it in full in the press conference after the game, saying like, I'm always going to go left. Maybe I shouldn't say it, but I'm just confident that my power will just take it past whoever, unless they like stand there. And it was kind of a funny moment, but yeah, and he wanted to take the penalty for his son Enzo, who was there, I think, at the game, and so that explains the rocking the baby celebration. If you know, you know, but now you know. So yeah, it's a nice moment. A bright spot on an otherwise pretty crappy night.
The search for a Locomotive penalty taker has gone on for a while now, Christian. It feels like we've tried just about everybody, and there's been some really great penalties, some really rough ones, but the way that Eric took that last night, you're thinking, why aren't you the taker like every time?
Yeah, and he is definitively not like the assigned taker. Brian said as much in the press conference. He didn't specify who usually does it, but he did say that he was surprised to see Eric at the spot. So, you know, maybe we see a change in the future. I mean, I think this might be like only the second penalty we've had this year, maybe third. Anyone check me on that?
I think
scored
it was the third.
right?
I think it was the third because is it the fourth? Because we had 2 in one match and Lucho had one. He scored one and had one saved.
Yep.
That's right.
Against Vegas, right?
Believe so.
And I think that might have been the only other ones this season. So, you know, if we're lucky enough to be blessed with another penalty call, we'll see what happens at that point in the future.
It felt at this point, and probably for a decent kind of the end of the first half, it did feel like Locomotive were growing into the game, Mika. And I mean, this was, I guess, probably Locomotive's best spell, and it's probably also informative in what happens the rest of the game that they didn't capitalize more on the dominance that they had during this period.
Yeah, I mean, especially like in the second half, I think that's where we looked a lot more cohesive and seemed to have gone back to the drawing board a little bit on how we're going to approach this game at halftime and came out much better for it. Yeah, I mean, Nick Hines, his absolute rocket off the bar. I mean, I talked about Eric Calvillo's ball striking technique, but Nicky Hines isn't so bad himself with this chance. And he's just like the most unlucky player to ever don the Locomotive shirt because, I mean, anyone else, you know, and that's going in as a goal. So, and that's really like the fine margins that we're talking about, you know, in this sport. You know, his chances off the bar and out, and Zouhir has 2 basically identical ones. The first one more so similar to Hines and of course goes in. So it's just one of those nights. But, you know, there were other chances too. I think Miles Lyons had like a header. He also had a kind of like a half volley, I guess you could call it, that Lucho had headed back into him towards the box. And I mean, the stats are brutal, honestly, when you compare them to the results that we've had. 4.6 XG for El Paso Locomotive in just the last 2 games. And I know there's a penalty in there, so that gives us like 1, but still. And then 1.65 XG against. So, I mean, we're just really not taking our chances. And we take the most shots in the league. 241 shots. Second is San Antonio with 233. So, I mean, just there's an inefficiency that's crept in. And it's very frustrating. I do think that I prefer it almost to like not having those chances at all. But it's frustrating in its own way when the chances are coming and you're just not taking them because it's Brian Clarhaut says it best. I mean, at the end of the day, what the table says matters, and there are no like moral victories in USL Championship.
When I think the official figure is now below 10%, as far as Locomotive's conversion rate, which is like creeping down towards one of the worst conversion rates in the league, like for having the highest shot volume, where if we converted at even an average amount, we'd be absolutely running away with it.
And a lot of our goals that we have scored are from outside the box, and that's just not sustainable.
Yeah.
Statistically, right? So, yeah.
But Christian, you had something to add on the Hines chance and the and probably the subsequent Zouhir goal.
Well, it was more of a comment to we were christening Hines as the unluckiest player, and I was just thinking about how Nick Ross used to be that guy a couple of years ago. Where
if
your
name is Nick, like just
yeah.
think about what that
you're
means.
gonna have a bad time.
Knicks do not thrive.
Yeah, he should have probably had like 5 or 6 more goals in a Locomotive uniform than he did. But that's all I was thinking about.
That's funny.
And how, yeah, I mean, basically from the time that Eric scored to when Zouhir starts his brace, that was our match. That 30-minute stretch, you know, from about 30 to 60, you know, was when we really were feeling ourselves. And the fact that, once again, you know, we have nothing to show for it is definitely concerning. But I think Duke asked yesterday evening about, is this, it's still a long season. We're only like halfway through the season, and we spent a good part of the first half at pretty high highs. So, like, yes, it's a problem that we haven't scored from open play in 5 matches or something. But we still have a fair amount of results in that time. And, I think the fact that 2 of the last 3 have been losses is kind of disheartening, but in perspective, it's far from time, I think, to hit the panic button or anything. But just something needs to be done. The changes need to be made, I guess, is what I think needs to be said. People shouldn't be sounding the alarms, calling for heads, and I don't think anyone really is, but I'm just worried that one more bad result and we're heading down that road when we really shouldn't be, considering the way that we've been since April, the form that we've had since April.
No, I think that's completely fair. I think when you look at the, depending on which kind of focus you take on the season, it's like if you look at the last 5 matches, it seems pretty rough. Like if you look at the last 10 matches, it starts to look a lot rosier in terms of like the overall, sort of picture. I think the concerning part for me is just like that we were not scoring that many goals, or let me rephrase, we weren't converting at a very high rate during our like good run. We were converting at a slightly higher rate than we are now. And I think my concern is like, okay, at some point we should see this regression to the mean of like, when are we going to get towards a more average, like even 13, 14, 15% conversion? I'm not talking like Monterey Bay levels early season where they were scoring like 30% of the shots they took. But when are we going to see that, like that progression, I guess, toward the mean of like where we do start seeing an increase in our conversion rate? And particularly last night, it just felt like we could have played for a long time and we weren't going to score from open play, just because the confidence just like didn't seem to be there from a lot of our guys who, we rely on to score goals. And I mean, I think it's telling that in the match, Lucho has 1 shot. I think Gomez has no shots. Like, it's a torrid night for Josué Gomez. Kostishin had 3, which was the most on the team. And Hines had the 1, which was the one off the bar, almost a wonder goal. That's it from the front 4, which is like...
Kostishin had the most shots? That's surprising. No, I'm kidding.
But he only had 1. He had 3 total shots, but 2 of them were blocked. So like
2 of them were blocked in the same sequence. He kept trying to like do something insane when there were passing options on.
And his other one was the like half kind of overhead that to follow up Hines' shot. So really, I mean, the rest of the game, the front 4 aside from that one sequence of Hines hitting the bar, there was only 1 other shot from the front 4 that was like threatening San Antonio. And everything else came from other players like elsewhere on the field. So our forwards didn't produce like a shot of danger basically at any point, aside from Hines rattling the bar. And obviously that would have been a stunning moment. And I there is a kinder, gentler universe out there where that went off the bar and in, and we're talking about an absolute banger, like USL goal of the week. Instead, we get to talk about just a couple minutes later, Zouhir rattles the bar with an absolute banger. and then follows it up with this quick fire double. The first of which you could kind of let Locomotive off the hook in that he runs onto the ball, or not even runs onto the ball. He spins on the ball and absolutely lashes it like in off the bar. 3 Benny Diaz's in goal don't save it. The second, ball lost in midfield. Zouhir onto it, kind of sees that Benny Diaz is off his line and has a lot of goal to aim at. Even though he's shooting from a similar area, a lot softer, I would say. But to get that kind of 4-minute sucker punch at a time where you've been the more threatening team, you've been the one creating, you've been the team on top, it felt very 2022 Locomotive.
Jeez.
If I dare say. In that the momentum just totally shifted like underneath the team's feet. And it felt like after that first Zouhir goal, they just kind of lost their heads, which hasn't been something that we've typically seen from Clarhaut's Locomotive up till now.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Phil, but that whole giveaway starts with Mark Navarro not wanting to take a touch and instead like looping it back into midfield for San Antonio to get back on the ball. Like we just kept doing that all night of like not trying to settle and just like get it out and feel like we were like get it away from our half basically.
Yeah.
It's just like it's I don't want to say cowardly because I feel like that's too strong, but it's just like
not taking responsibility.
Right. Like why are we playing within ourselves? Like we're good enough to like go toe to toe with these guys at home, right? And as this continues, like our home form is a shocker. That's 5 losses at home. So I didn't like that we were doing that we were playing within ourselves. And so, that turnover, just the second one is more inexcusable for me from Zouhir because we're just like bobbling it around in the edge of our area. And then, I mean, I had a question, whether Benny Diaz's positioning is not the greatest. I think we're, more often than not, Benny's pretty aggressive in his positioning, and for the most part, it works and it works for our play style, right? So, just maybe a little bit if I could complain about that, but it's not like huge or anything. But it just loops over him.
It's like the one time that he's been punished for it this year.
Right, exactly. And that's what I'm saying is like more often than not, like that risk is worth taking because he's so integral to our buildup. But when it does like go wrong, like it looks terrible. So, yeah.
And I do want to say like this is not a, like Benny needs to change. I think we had a lot of conversations last year about like, is Evan Newton the dude that should be doing this sort of goalkeeping? It's like, I think Benny has more than acquitted himself in that, like, often his positioning is spot on.
For sure.
There's so many saves that he's made this year that are him just catching a ball because he's standing in exactly the right spot.
Didn't he have a save of the week against Monterrey? Like literally
against New Mexico, I think.
Was he?
Or was it the Monterey save?
Yeah,
it was the Monterey
just
save
last week. Yeah,
it was the Monterey save.
I mean, he's in fine form. We're just
we're
nitpicking a little bit, but
I think this one it's more about the giveaway in midfield than it is about
for sure
Benny's positioning, because there's just no world in which we should be giving the ball to a confident guy 20 yards from goal, like from our own goal,
and reacting so slowly.
To like close them down. And so I think there's probably a lot of blame to go around there, but the second felt like comparatively soft. Christian, in the ground, I mean, it feels like the first had the impact of a literal gut punch of the air went out of Southwest University Park in a lot of ways. And it did feel like the mood of the game was like a lot different. Is that a fair characterization based off of how it felt on the broadcast? And I don't know how much of my own emotions I'm projecting onto the crowd.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I personally felt that way because it's just one of like, I don't know. It's one of those where, what can you really do about it? But also like, man, like we had been in control for a good set of time just up until now, and then they do that. So like I think it was like, what else can we do? Because I think that we really needed a win here, and like you had said earlier, it just didn't feel like we were going to score another goal. So to have them equalize felt like we were just putting ourselves in a really risky position now, to try and get that 3 points at all.
The part of the question marks here, I guess, come in the response. And we've talked about this Locomotive team's during their unbeaten run, their ability to respond to adversity. I mean, we've got a number of examples. San Diego Loyal like pops to mind right off the top. Colorado Springs, I think, is another one where we concede and then immediately go or reestablish, a 2-goal lead. And it's like, so there's a lot of moments where we can say like, man, they really responded well to adversity. I mean, there was a stretch of matches where we didn't drop any point. We have the most points gained from losing positions in the whole league. So like clearly that we talked about like the mentality and the strength of this team. Now, you can say like late goal in the derby, what can you do? This one, there was still half an hour to be played after Zouhir's second. And while there were chances for Locomotive, it didn't feel like the response, and I don't know if this is unfair, but it didn't feel like the response was quite as emphatic. I don't know if that's just because I'm saying like this hindsight being 2020 and we didn't score any goals. But the response from both the players and I would argue Brian in the aftermath of going behind was relatively weak given some of the responses that we've seen from this Locomotive side in responding to going behind or responding to that, like taking that punch on the jaw. They've typically bounced back from those. And this one, it just didn't feel like we responded quite in the same way that we have in the past.
I mean, again, I think you have to look at the changes that we made. I think we've kind of established at the starting 11 that we see more often than not, their level has dropped like a notch, which is enough to lose you games in this league. And then the bench, who their quality is more or less steady. It just shows like that margin is too great, right? Like between a winning and a losing team. Sinube comes on, wasn't up to a lot. Miles Lyons comes on, was more of a spark, but he's a right back. I mean, why is our right back like getting to chances in the box? Like he's not going to be as clinical as say a striker or a winger or someone like, so I can hardly blame the kid really. Chapa Herrera, like he's been coming on a lot in situations where we're not just trying to like tidy up and see out a match, where we're trying to actually get a point and maybe 3, right? I adore Chapa, but that's not his role. He's scored 3 goals in his entire Locomotive career, 87 appearances. Like he's not that guy, right?
It's like, and 2 of them were in one match.
2 of them were in Colorado, yeah. So, and then Petrovic, who's clearly only good enough for like 15 minutes right now. I think he comes up in the 75th minute. Like
it's like on the money every week.
Yeah,
like 75 minutes.
I mean, that's basically
or 80 minutes.
That's as prescribed as it gets, right? So
yeah,
it's just that gap. Like the collective form has dropped, and now the players that we have to like mix it up, it's just not that. It's not good enough. Like I don't want to. I really don't want to be cruel because I do like these players, but. It's, I mean, Chapa coming on, that's the big one for me is, he comes on again
for Liam. He comes on for Liam this time. I think he came on for Castician against Monterey Bay, which just was kind of like a
waving the white flag type of sub. Yeah.
I mean, you're bringing on a holding midfielder ostensibly for our most volumetric shooter. So like, I mean, you're kind of making a statement of intent there. Right. This one, he comes on for Liam Rose, but at the same time, like Liam wasn't booked, wasn't like, and unless Liam, there is a very good argument for Liam being gassed because he's played like every minute of football this year, along with like Bence Pavkovits. Right. Like they've just played every freaking game. But aside from that, the one I'd argue is like, I think the Chapa one, I'm almost more in the camp of like, when Manny comes on 62 minutes, I'm fine with that sub, like on the surface.
Yeah.
I don't think it needs to be Nick Hines who comes off.
That is what to me is so bad. And I'm sorry to cut across you. It's just like,
yeah,
crazy.
I think Gomez absolutely should get hauled off on 62 minutes. He looked totally ineffectual. Like, and everybody can comb the record. This is like the most pro Josue Aron Gomez outlet that you will possibly find on earth. And he was not good last night. Fatma had him, for an outfield player to get a below 6 rating is really severe when you don't like actively concede a penalty or a goal. His 30 touches, no successful dribbles, no successful crosses, no accurate long balls. He's dispossessed 4 times. He loses 9 out of the 12 ground duels that he attempted and lost the 1 aerial duel that he attempted. He completes 11 of 16 passes. He's barely involved. Like, let's just be real.
Might be his worst game for us ever.
If I could give some mitigation, I do think that San Antonio defended him superbly.
Yeah.
I mean, they did the thing, like, they know that if you let him back into you, he's going to win that foul. They just stopped him turning.
Yeah. And there is a moment early in the first half where they threatened to break off a San Antonio corner. Like, header comes back, it falls to the feet of Aron Gomez. He's breaking away. Lamar Bautista just kicks him and doesn't get booked, and it set the tone for like how San Antonio could then defend the rest of the game. Because he's on the break, he's gonna, he's into a situation where he's gonna be in some open space. And Bautista hauls him down and doesn't get booked. And it was like, okay, cool. Tacit agreement that tactical fouls are not punishable by yellow cards. So that being said, though, with it being so ineffectual, a good way to shake up a team that has defended a particular player so well is to remove that player from the game. Because, like, if you introduce Emmanuel Sinupe in this role that he's kind of played, that he's been coming on in, like, it seems like Clarhaut's been changing the shape when Manny comes on. Like, he did it against Monterrey. He played in the 10. Like, we don't have a 10. So, like, we almost started playing like I don't even know. Like, it wasn't even a 4-2-3-1. It was like a 4-2-1-1 or something like that. I don't even know. I'm not even sure. I just know that Gomez was being marked out of the game, was being really limited in what he could do. For me, you bring Manny on 62 minutes, you take off Gomez, who's struggled to get involved. And if it's a change of shape where, in that case, you can basically keep Hines where he is and then have Manny play behind Lucho. Costician can stay in like his, kind of roaming playmaker role, and you just kind of mix it up in that way. And on 62 minutes, when he makes that Manny sub, he absolutely should have brought Miles Lyons on as well. Like,
agreed.
And that's not a criticism of Mark Navarro. That's an acknowledgement of the fact that we look more dangerous in those, like, when we're pushing and need goals, we look more dangerous when Miles is involved. Like, a little bit more dynamic, a little bit quicker player. Mark oozes quality and, like, has some good moments in this game. And I think, like, by 62 minutes, we probably should have had Miles on.
Yep.
Those are my 2, like, criticisms of the subs. Christian, I don't know. I've been keeping you sidelined here. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on the response or on Brian's response with the subs.
It just seems like Mika said, that just the quality from the bench has not been sufficient. And whether you attribute that to injury or just them coming on at rough spots in the game, you have to do something about it. You've got to start finding players. I know that the big thing to say, and everyone said it. Brian said it, Hutch said it, Marcus said it, is that, you know, you need to find guys that fit the culture, and that's great and stuff, but, you know, at some point you need to do something. There needs to be a way to stop, not the bleeding, but just improve. And this is me talking about things that I don't know nearly enough about, but I just refuse to believe that there's just no one out there for us right now, or that, you know, there's just so many obstacles. Every team is different. I don't pretend to know how teams are run, and it's just a coincidence that we're playing against San Antonio, but like San Antonio has signed like 15 players since the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I would just love to know, and you know, anyone from Locomotive front office could tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about out there, right? But then, like, help me understand then, like, what is keeping us from making more than one signing halfway into the season when injuries are clearly a problem? Like, I don't know.
I mean, I don't want to say half, but a good chunk of the San Antonio squad are MLS loanees. Like, Zouhir is on loan, you know, from...
Is it Minnesota? I don't remember.
Toronto?
I looked it up right now. It's Montreal.
Oh,
Montreal.
Okay.
The artist formerly known as the Montreal Impact. So I mean, they're finding value in the loan market. We've previously found value in the loan market for these like kind of short-term solutions, that sort of thing. And I mean, if we're looking for something that's not as big of a commitment, I think, you know, it would be one thing if it's like, hey, you know, if Brian is coming out and saying, hey, these 22, 23 guys, I trust them and I know that we can get the job done. Cool. We aren't using the squad. Like, he's not putting them in the games. So like,
yeah, it's like,
so he doesn't trust them. Like, and I don't mean that as men, as like men. I just mean he doesn't trust them like to get the job done.
I was gonna say, I mean, maybe we're getting into tinfoil hat here, but I mean, it's a thing in Europe where a manager will put kids on the bench or not even name a full bench to be like, hey, front office, I need players. And I don't know if we can afford to do that at this level, but I mean, sometimes when you see how the 11 doesn't change at all, one wonders.
Yeah.
So
it's like,
but then again, like, he's the technical director, so I mean, he doesn't hold the purse strings, but he certainly does, you know, find the players you know, with help. But I don't know. Yeah, help me understand too, I guess. I'm with you, Christian.
And I'm just so curious. There's things that we're never gonna know, but it's just so curious. Like, Artem, you know, if he's not good enough to be in the bench every week, that's fine. But to never see like a minute, like, unless it's something personal, like, I don't understand that. You know, Lalito is young. I get all that, but you know, he's seen stoppage time minutes. You know, Anders hurt, but like Abarca and Maldonado, I don't think Maldonado's played at all. Abarca's gotten a few minutes there, and again, I know that they're kids, but like, we are clearly strapped, like, and it's not that there is no one. And like you guys said, if Brian doesn't think that they're up to it, then something needs to be done about it, because there's still half a season left, and we can't play 17 more games with 13 players. Like, it's not going to work. We're going to start sinking at some point. We're not right now. This is a rough patch, like I said at the beginning, but you have to make changes. It's not just, the situation is not going to fix itself. Someone needs to actively solve the problem. And just from where we're sitting, completely outside, it just doesn't look like that's being done.
Well, that sort of leads into, or I guess partially answers in some way, at Der Schattenwolf, the Shadow Wolf's question on Twitter. Are the Loco currently in a bad run of form, or are opponents now able to better prepare for Clarhaut's game plan or tactics? I mean, is this a blip that the team works their way out of? Is this teams understanding how Clarhaut plays and finding ways to beat it?
I think it's a little bit of both, yeah. I mean, I think we are in a bad run of form for sure. It happens. That's football. Again, like I cited our XG earlier, not to be a stats nerd, but to show like we have deserved more than we've gotten, you know, in front of goal. But at the same time, like we haven't always deserved to win necessarily either. So, yeah, bad run of form. Are opponents able to prepare better? I think so. I think if you get up in our face, pin us back, you know, outnumber us in key areas of the pitch, there are tired legs out there that are just hoofing the ball when they were not doing that a month ago, 2 months ago. So the thing that I will say for Locomotive fans listening to this that I think is a green shoot of hope is that we have a manager who is not delusional about what the issues are, because he discussed them quite honestly in the press conference and said he talked about we haven't had an open play goal in some time, right? Like he's very big into the video, the film, and the stats and all that, and so that gives me a little bit of hope of like, I hope even sounds a bit dramatic, but like a little bit of like comfort in that, like he knows exactly what it is, right? I think there were times in the past with maybe our most recent manager where we're like, really, like couldn't tell if we were just making excuses or we really didn't know if we've like lost the plot. But with Brian, like I don't see that. I see someone who actually really knows what the issue is, and the part of it that we don't know yet, which I said at the top of the show, is can he find solutions? I think he identifies the issue just fine. Can he find solutions? We're going to see.
I think there's a couple of things you mentioned, you know, this run of form, and like we have 2 games in the derby and this Copa Tejas match where there were times where we looked poor because of stuff that the opposition was doing, which does suggest that there are like those managers that have done their homework now on Brian and understand how he sets Locomotive up and how he wants them to play. They are finding like weak spots in that game. And like, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that like Monterey Bay absolutely did not figure us out. We absolutely should have schmacked that team for like 4 goals. And it was purely a lack of finishing that like kept us from doing that. There was nothing about the way that Monterey played that limited us. We literally did whatever we want except score. Like that was an absolute hammering that ended 0-0, which is just crazy. So I think there is like, you know, to your point, Mika, about it being a little bit of both, is like, I think over these last 3 matches winless, we have 2 examples where it's like, we probably deserved more than what we got out of both of them in terms of our chances in front of goal. And there was a little bit of the opponent like figuring out certain aspects of our game because we've been so consistent in how we played. I think one of the things that we pointed to was early on was Brian's strength in adaptation, and the fact that certain players were kind of occupying, like despite occupying the same position. I think Dennis is probably the best example of this. Despite occupying the same position, they were being deployed in like different ways. I would argue that over the last 3 games, that has not been the case, where it has been really kind of the same each time. And I don't know that we've adapted. And I don't know if it has to do with the amount of games and like the pace of, and like the travel we've been doing, like you said, and maybe the pace of the games. So I don't know if that's impacting our ability to adapt, but it felt at one point like we were really changing game to game role-wise, even if not shape-wise. Now that doesn't necessarily seem to be the case.
Yeah, that's what I was about to hit on, Phil, is that, you know, we are in a bad run of form, and we have had some injury problems, and that really limits Brian's options, and therefore makes it easier to plan against him, you know, with and it's really just the matter of Zacharias and Petrovic not being completely available. Because I think that with just them two, that opens up a whole bunch of things that you can do. That allows you to, Zacharias being healthy allows you to bring, well, Zacharias and Petrovic being healthy allows you to bring Gomez off the bench, you know, which is huge. When he doesn't have to play 90 minutes every match, I think Gomez can be way more effective. Or vice versa, you know, sliding Gomez for Zacharias in the starting lineup and have Zacharias come in and just body people in the last 30 minutes of the match. So I think that we're in a bad run of form because of injuries, and like you said, that just makes it so much easier to game plan, because he has one move basically with the roster that we have. Brian has one move that he can make, and the worst thing is that it's just a very defensive move too. It's a very conservative move. It doesn't allow us to be aggressive later in the matches, which is what we've needed to do because we've been conceding first quite frequently, or just getting tired, like you said, and that allows other teams to close the matches stronger than we're able to defend against at the end of the match.
No, I think that makes total sense. And talking about the depth chart in that way, obviously it is, you know, it's something we had last season where it's like we had right backs until we didn't. And it's sort of the same thing where it's like, you know, if our squad doesn't plan for the potential injuries, and if we start looking that short after a guy or two guys are hurt, like then we're going to be pretty rough in the run-in, because this is not going to be, you know, Zacharias being hurt and, you know, Petrovic being out for a while. Like, these are not the last injuries that are going to happen this season. Like, there's going to be more. That's just statistically like a probability at the moment.
Remember when we were told in May that Yuma would be out for a month?
Mm-hmm.
Just saying.
Yeah. Now, I don't know, like, it's almost, we're not quite there because we have a lot of season left, but there's a little bit of like, I'm just getting a little bit of retirement vibes off Yuma. I'm not saying he's going to retire. I'm not saying that Yuma is going anywhere. I'm just saying that, like, he's been in plain clothes a lot. He's been kind of at the signing table, like,
yeah.
The involvement, I'm just not sure what level of involvement Yuma has had, like, physically been able to have with the team. So anyways, that's an aside there. But the bottom line, rough result in El Paso against San Antonio. The Seriously Loco match preview. I guess the thing is that Locomotive turn right back around on Saturday and face RGV Toros, who, despite starting the season very, very poorly, are on a little bit of a positive run recently, and have actually now not lost in 6, and they've won 3 out of their last 4. Those wins coming over Colorado Springs, Oakland, a draw against Sacramento Republic, and then a win over Orange County. So RGV, a few games ago, we were probably looking at this game as, this is a nice reprieve from what is otherwise a kind of a tough run. And now this RGV game, they're visiting El Paso this time, but we've got another game against them coming up in short order. This RGV game is suddenly looking a little rougher in terms of being a potential streak breaker. What do you guys make of RGV making their way to the SWUP?
Well, it's never straightforward with them. We haven't beaten them since 2021. So, I mean, and they kind of edged the head-to-head just slightly. So, yeah, take that history with the fact that they're 6 games unbeaten, and I want no parts of this, to be honest. That's just like a huge banana skin, I think. Yeah, and then another like Copa Tejas match as well. So, for those who are like interested in following that table, like this could get ugly quick. But RGV as a team this season are a bit of a blind spot for me, to be fair. I mean, I know they've got Wilmer Cabrera at the helm, and some players that have been there a while, like Tyler Derrick and things like that. But I just don't really know what to expect. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know exactly how they play.
The potential narratives on hand, Christian, just through the involvement of Cristiano Francois, feels like a banana peel all its own.
Yeah, I mean, we were just waiting all season for him to break out, and he hasn't done a ton in RGV this season. He's got 2 goals, which I think is more than he managed to score for us in a full season. So who knows what will happen when he comes back. But yeah, I mean, I have concerns, I guess, because I think he plays on the right, if I remember correctly. So, good luck, Eder. That's all I'm gonna say there.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, it seems like overall the goal scoring and stuff has been spread kind of a lot throughout the team, although Wilmer Cabrera Jr., so the son of Toros manager Wilmer Cabrera, leads the team with 5 goals and 2 assists. So he's having a great season. Taylor Davila has 3 goals to his name as well and 3 assists. Wahab Akwi has 2 goals. Cristiano Francois, as you mentioned, has 2 goals. He has 2 assists. So it's a little bit spread out, not as much of a clear danger man, but Wilmer Cabrera Jr., I guess the man to stop for Locomotive.
Oh boy, yeah, he looks like an actual child in his
The Nepo baby.
The Nepo baby of USL. Dear God. I mean, he looks like a baller, to be fair, but yeah.
Like you guys said, I think the tough thing for RGV is that recently they've become a little stingy in that previously, like, the run that they had been on, they lost 3 in a row where they conceded at least 2 goals every game. They lose 3-0 to Tampa Bay, 2-0 to Charleston, 2-0 to Orange County, and it feels like they're totally like on the wrong track. They have a 3-3 draw with Miami, a 2-2 draw with New Mexico. It's like, okay, RGV's memeing, but still on the same track. Well, over the last games, they've only allowed 1 goal. The last 4 games, they've only allowed 1 goal, and that was against Sac Republic on the road. So, and in a draw, like a 1-1 draw. So they have suddenly, over the last 4 games, found this newfound stinginess, which I guess is kind of the worst case scenario for a Locomotive team who is looking to score goals. Or could it be that RGV's whatever magic they found is about to dissipate and Locomotive's about to hit them for, a thwacking?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know that this is the time that we're going to turn it around. Like, this is at the very end of 3 games, right, in a row. So, I don't know. I don't think we'll get destroyed. Maybe a draw. I don't know. What say you, Christian?
Just like any matchup against RGV just feels like it's just gonna be so painful to watch. Like, I want no part of this. I think hopefully we score a goal and we can get out of there with a 1-0 if I'm being very hopeful. Just let's score again, please, from open play.
That's what we need, a confidence booster in a goal. Yeah, I just looking at the stats, it is really mind blowing. So, they had been on a run of 7 straight games conceding 2 or more goals, and then snap that streak with a shutout win over Switchbacks at home, and since then they haven't allowed a goal. So, just a really strange one to try to predict, because this RGV team's kind of been all over the place. I want to believe that this is a blip of seriousness from an otherwise not very good RGV team, but I don't know that I can see their unseriousness resurfacing against us. Like, it just doesn't feel like the matchup's ever gone that way. They find whatever deep reserves of seriousness that they have, and they turn it on for the Locomotive match. So, yeah, I'll say, like, I'm hopeful for a Locomotive win to turn things around and just end this little skid that we're on. But yeah, everything about it just screams trouble. So, yeah, it's not the streak breaker that I thought it could be coming into it. And I think RGV have a good chance of getting a result here, unfortunately, just given our goal scoring woes. Be interesting. I don't think it's worth even speculating about Locomotive's lineup, because I think we all know what it's going to be, barring injury. But I do think it'll be interesting to see if there are any tweaks at all, to try to elicit some sort of a response, as you said, Mika, early on in this one. Like, if there is anyone who does find themselves like dropped, in maybe Brian trying to spark some stuff, particularly up top. Well, guys, that does about do it in terms of like Locomotive discussion, but we had some news in USL, and the news is even a little bit strong of a word to use for it. But there was news coming out of USL and reported by Jeff Ruder that USL was exploring promotion and relegation with its Board of Governors. So basically all of the club owners who have a seat on USL's Board of Governors and vote on rule changes and structure changes and competition stuff and all of that. There was this report that came out in The Athletic via Jeff Ruder and Tom Bogert about promotion and relegation being tabled as an issue for USL, and that there were some ownership groups who were in favor and some ownership groups who were not. Mika, I mean, from the beginning, you kind of said, and I think what we said from Seriously, or what I tweeted from the Seriously Loco account, I'll out myself in this way, was that because we had been asked for some responses and I was kind of holding off just because this is such a kind of sensitive issue. And I didn't mean to like straddle the fence, but the reality is, like, it's kind of, and this isn't to denigrate the reporting that Jeff Ruder or Tom Bogert do, because they're both quality journalists who do a very good job. And Jeff Ruder's a good friend of us and he's been on the show before. So it's, absolutely no hate towards Jeff. The tone of the piece and like how things came out, we just said that, hey, we're not really gonna have a take on this until it becomes something to kind of have an opinion on. Because right now it's just somebody saying, hey, it's gonna be up for vote, and there's some people who support it and some people who don't. So for right now, like, it just kind of isn't anything, right? Like, until it is something, if that makes sense.
Right. I mean, it's all just, first of all, the way that this came out and the way that Jeff's piece is written, which it's a fantastic piece, don't get me wrong, is just like, it's very clear that the source is pro promotion and relegation, right? And so that's the tone that it takes on, is like, this is a good thing, we need to do this, like, hope and all that about it. But I think it's been put out there to like put pressure on this upcoming meeting of the Board of Governors in August. And right, it's exactly like you said, like nothing has really like come to pass, and by and large the attitude towards promotion and relegation by the powers that be in this country has not been a welcoming one. So this news is interesting, it's intriguing, it's definitely worth following, but there's been nothing definitively to say that all of a sudden like all these millionaires are going to be okay with their investment being relegated. You know what I mean? And while I am a proponent of promotion relegation myself, I do think there needs to be serious due diligence about how that's going to work in this country, because it is, it's not all rosy. Like there are serious consequences to being relegated. People lose their jobs, right? I mean, and their livelihoods. And, I think one thing that some people have brought up on Twitter is like, there's a possibility that anyone that gets relegated will never be promoted, right? Because an investor at that point will just say, like, I'm not doing this. Or, more casual fans will just kind of fall by the wayside. So, yeah, all of that to say, like, I think we've gone on record multiple times that we're in favor of it because we are football fans. We have clubs that we support in other countries, and that's how it works. But it's just too early to really say, like, one way or another, I think.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, there is talk that the piece, like, or the reporting, like, was kind of pushed because there are people who are very supportive of it on the USL Board of Governors, and they are trying to drum up some public pressure around the fact that they know it's not universally liked in terms of, like, within USL. There are owners who are resistant to it. And I mean, of course there are, like, when you have American businessmen like get into a certain relationship and then it's like, hey, let's alter the terms of the deal. Like that is going to make anybody sort of like, whoa, like this isn't what I signed up for, unless they've got a reason for wanting to see that sort of movement. And I think at the end of the day, I, as Phil, personally love when, like, the fact that there are consequences for owners in global sport, because one of the things I hate the most about American sports is the fact that there are no consequences for the owners. Like, they're protected from any risk in any, like, sporting business venture that they have, and I'm talking specifically about major league sports. I'm not saying there's no risk in any sporting investment in the U.S., but our major league sports are structured in such a way that protect the investors from risk to their investment. I prefer a system in which there are consequences for your actions, and like, and that if you do well and you're a good steward, then like, you should benefit from that. And if you don't do well and you're not a good steward, then you should be punished for that. And there should be consequences. And there, like you said, Mika, there are real world consequences for, like, it's not just consequences for the owner when those consequences come to pass. And it does have to be done responsibly. It has to be done in a way that's sustainable. Ultimately, I think it would be better for the sustainability of U.S. soccer, because we've watched for how long now clubs just come and go because there's no ability to like move up, like that. We've seen how many clubs just die on the vine. Reno, Fresno, just to name Austin Bold. Yeah, I mean, and that's just since Locomotive joined USL in 2019, like that, and that's not even all of them. So there's, and that's just second division clubs, not to mention the countless clubs at lower levels that have come and gone. So while I think it's a noble venture, it's something that I think would differentiate USL from MLS in a very specific and like interesting way. And like, it's a lot more than just saying, I declare promotion and relegation. Like, you can't, it's the Michael Scott vibe of like, you can't just declare it. Like, you have to do a lot to get there. And even if they vote on it, like, there are major structural changes that would have to take place to how USL is set up, they talked about introducing a tier potentially in between the championship and League One, as like rather than adding a third tier below League One, it would be a tier between them, which is like, what does that even look like? How many teams are we talking about per league? Does it mean the championship goes to a conference, like a single table conference list, structure? There's just a lot of questions that would need answering. And I think at the end of the day, like, until we know the answers to some of those things, it's really just, it's something that, while it would be cool, and while I think it would provide a lot of impetus for potential investment, if someone was like, I can buy a third division or a fourth division club for X amount of money and turn it into an investment that's worth a lot more, that could be really appealing to potential investors. All that being said, it just isn't anything until people put it into action and actually make a plan. So while it feels like a more concrete step from USL, it's not enough of a step for it to really make a difference in how we talk about it, I guess, because at the end of the day, it still isn't implemented. So, or there is no real plan to implement it. We're just talking about a vote. So, yeah.
Period.
That's my.
It is exciting though. I mean, I get
it is an exciting
I get the
thing.
Frenzy around it. I do, because it's exciting that it's even being talked about. Because
for sure,
for years it felt like that was even like ridiculous, right?
Right.
So yeah,
it's just never going to be a thing. And I think at the end of the day, like USL, I like that USL is at least having conversations about how it will need to differentiate the product, because I think at a certain point, MLS is targeting USL expansion, like they're targeting USL cities as their main expansion targets. Literally, Don Garber, when he talks about the next MLS team, has only named USL cities, Tampa, Phoenix, San Diego. Like, he's only named those places as potential expansion. San Diego is the next one. So there's just like, I think USL has to be feeling the pressure of eventually MLS is going to come for all of our cities. And it's whether like we'll have to be either doing something different or just like assimilate, and I think right now it's clear that USL would prefer to like forge their own path and do something different. But yeah, it is exciting that they're talking about it. Will it come to pass? I'm not optimistic. I'm not optimistic that enough of the owners are like progressive or like farsighted enough in like what they're doing with their club to really be like ambitious enough to try to pull something like this off.
Yeah, I'd have to agree.
So, anyways, I think that probably about does it.
I think it does.
Now that I've fully derailed us.
We've waffled a bit. We needed to, though. Yeah. It was cathartic, so.
Yeah. Well, guys, that does about bring us to the end of the discussion here tonight. Hopefully you've enjoyed the episode. Like I said at the top of the episode, you can find us on any podcast platform that you enjoy. And if you did enjoy it, leave us a review if you can on that platform, as it does let more locos find us. And you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Seriously Loco. We're on a handful of different platforms. Like I said, not Threads yet. Seems boring. So anyways, catch us there, follow, all that sort of stuff. And we will talk to you guys hopefully after a bounce back win over RGV on Saturday. But until then, stay loco.